I'm kind of interested, Matt, in what you think about this being a Torah professor. You guys look at great books where guys talk a lot about virtues and what are the virtues. And so what do you think in light of this, in light of these ideas of maybe exercising self-control or making people aware of these actions they need to take in the digital space, what would you say are some of the virtues that need to be practiced or developed? And that brings us back to the educational environment, is how do we do that? Because you can say like, hey, have this checklist of little boxes to look at, but there's always going to be a new social media platform. And I think that's the beauty of something like virtues, right? Is this gives you a broad, principle-based way of approaching life, approaching the world that's flexible in different environments. So let me throw that open to you first. Like,
this
what do you
feels,
think about that?
in some ways, like the most obvious one, but I really do. I think I want to take it in a maybe less obvious way. I would start with humility.
Yeah.
And the first thing I think that we typically want to do is talk about this culture of self-presentation and concern about cultivating one's own image and identity. And absolutely, I think central to humility is resisting that strongly.
Oh yeah.
But I think as much as anything, there might just be something about this kind of Ignatian idea of holy indifference. So one form that humility could take is a holy indifference to how others perceive me.
You mean that I might not care about how many likes they got?
Yes, absolutely. I might not care, and I might, and I sort of will do what I'm going to do in life, but also online, in good conscience, in courage, with wisdom and discernment. So being, that's another one, wisdom, discernment.
Yeah.
But I'll do it, and then I'll leave the results to be what they'll be. I do think we're in a time when, more than anything, because of the persistence of our presence online, we can't read how things are going to go. And so I think that indifference to outcomes and a certain contentment in anonymity, I think is huge. I want to be someone who delights in anonymity. I'm not, but I want to be someone who does that at least. And I can feel something of the life and the liberation that comes in being happy to be not known.
I would say another virtue that goes along with all those that you need is self-control. You have to have self-control in order to do all those things you're talking about. And in fact, social media actually encourages us to not have self-control, because the way that it's set up, again, the defaults, is that it values an immediate response and sort of a quick, unthinking response. The volume, the louder the volume you are, the more rewarded you are on social media. But self-control is going to be the way to get.
We need moral exemplars here too. So we need not just the virtues, but we need the virtuous. Yeah. So my pastor, John, he's a really interesting guy because he's very connected, very technologically savvy, very kind of with it in general. I was shocked to find out that he and his wife don't have email on their phones because they're texting all the time, they're Instagram, they're doing all this stuff. But they don't have email on their phones. And by the way, he's also a very prompt responder on email. So he's the furthest thing from a Luddite. But simply seeing that they resisted the compulsion to do email on their phone was part of getting me over the hump to say, well, I guess I don't have to have email on my phone. I guess I really could do it. And I also don't have to be the kind of person who looks down his nose at technology to back away from email. So and I think it was them, just knowing that they did that nudged me over.
Yeah, I think the role of exemplar is huge. I mean, because
what would Jesus post?
Yeah, but I think looking at people who do it well is a really good idea. I mean, having this idea of what are the virtues in general, and what are the vices to be ignored. I mean, that's the other side of the coin, right? Like, yes, we want to cultivate virtue, but we also want to move against vice. And this is why I like the point you're making, Matthew, about being aware of defaults on, say, a social media platform, is because I think back in 2011, I wish I remember the author's name, there was a commentary piece on the Wall Street Journal that actually applied this idea of the 7 deadly sins to social media.
Oh, that's great.
And they took each of the deadly sins and said, this social platform exemplifies this deadly sin. I recommend reading it because I think what that does is it turns us into this idea that a platform, because it is a built environment, like you were saying, Matthew, it has certain presumptions or assumptions about humanity and human behavior built into it. It appeals to certain vices. And if we recognize that, then we go in knowing, I think particularly as Christians, we go in recognizing that the default for this platform is to promote vice. And so I need to now address that if I'm going to practice virtue.
It strikes me too that often the defaults are vice quickly because of the instantaneous character of all this stuff. And it seems that at least in the early days of growing in virtue, what happens is something like this. I feel an inclination towards a vicious action, thought, word. And then if I'm growing in virtue by the power of the Spirit, I'm able to say no to it. But I still feel that initial inclination. If we're in a cultural moment of instantaneous response, there's no lag time in which typically the Spirit is going to help me grow in virtue by saying no to the first response. Oh gosh, I mean, you could apply this to any vice, but rage. Say someone says something about you online, and your first impulse is,
Yeah.
And you can post something right in that moment.
And that's exactly it. And
that'd make a great Snapchat selfie.
Yeah, if Matthew and I run into each other and say I see something really rude, but we're kind of going past each other, and his first response, but it's too late to respond in the moment, is to say, I'm going to get him. Hopefully, in the next 24 hours before I see him again, he's had some time to call him, but more importantly, the Spirit has worked in him and deepening virtue in him so that he's able to turn his back on the vicious response of revenge. But if it's instantaneous, he's just like, boom, I'm going to blow you up on Facebook and it's all over.
Yeah, again, that's
actually, I think
back
in the
to
article,
self-control.
Twitter was the rage one.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So Twitter.
And Facebook's got to be the pride one or the vainglory or something.
Something like that,
Instagram might be. Post pictures on
Instagram. We'd have to go back and check the article, but it's got some fantastic connection points. But how quickly it is, the instantaneous response is so important, that to recognize that is more likely to cultivate, breed, and encourage vice-like behavior rather than virtuous behavior, because virtue is something that's cultivated, worked on, developed, and that just doesn't happen at the flip of a switch.
And the antidote is to cultivate the intentionality again, the intentionality in the way we respond, what we look at, what we interact with. That's hard to do.
So if we're assuming that social platforms are built environments that encourage vice as the default, because I think that's what we're saying.
Is that
here.
what we got to?
This is what we got to. What would a social platform look like that has virtue and maybe a particular
here's what
virtue
would happen.
as a default?
You would log in, you'd type your username, then you type your password, you click log in, and it would click to the log off page right there, and you'd be done. Then you go talk to your friends.
Or we'd go back to like 9.6 kbps, and so cultivating the virtue of patience and self-control.
But I mean, assuming that we have the built environment of the internet today, like very quick load times, super fast Wi-Fi, instantaneous. I mean, with all those prescriptive aspects.
Well, you could say things like simplicity of design.
Yeah.
So I think there would be less clutter, which would encourage a certain kind of attentiveness, a certain awareness of what one was seeing.
Yeah. I would almost say that I would want to see a blank page where I get to choose what to see.
I love that. Yeah.
In fact, I think the very first days of Facebook, before they had the feed, that was kind of like what it was. You would have to go searching. I want to go see what this friend is doing. I want to go see what that friend is doing.
But I could also imagine something where every time you logged in or engaged it, you had to create something on it. So you had to draw something.
Somehow.
You had to choose an item, and I can imagine that not being permanent. So there is there's a sense of refresh, which I think is great for play and creativity, but also so much of pride, greed, envy, at least those things go into this sense of a property that goes with this long-term presence. You can't mess with my profile. But what if every day I had to contribute to the making of whatever I was engaging with, and it was going to refresh again? So it was another try. There's forgiveness, possibly there.
I have another idea. What if, as you log in, you type your username, your password, and a number of minminutes that you intend to be on there, and that when that expires, it either logs you off forcibly or it tells you and say you've only got 1 minute left or something like that. Because I can't tell you how many times I've opened up the Facebook app to do something specific. I need to check and see what time this is. And then 5 minutes later, I shut down the Facebook app and think, okay, what was I doing? Oh, yeah, and I didn't even do the thing that I went there for. And I have to log in again.
Some kinds of things, like things that are bringing to awareness some of our decisions. You could have a 10-click maximum, where you can do whatever you want on this site, but you get 10 clicks. Then you're out. Or something like that that arbitrarily limits it.
So we're talking about like front end interaction, user interaction. I wonder if there needs to be almost like what has to happen on the back end with the company providing this platform.
Yeah.
What
Here's
virtue
what needs to
be
happen.
built into that company's culture?
It needs to
gets into
cost
corporate
money.
Culture.
It needs to cost money to use it. The more you use it, the more it costs.
Why so?
Because nothing's free, and so if we're paying for it, then that's the value that it's providing. Whereas if anything's free, that the value is coming from advertisers or from
This is
some
not
other thing.
ad-based,
So it
and
can't be
therefore it's
ad-based.
not quite as embedded in this kind of consumer landscape.
Because I do feel like there does need to be a degree of almost like a social contract with whatever company builds this platform between the users and the company. Because I think that's the interesting thing that's not often talked about with social media today is no one really seems to define like what is this social contract. The companies know. They have a user agreement for you to click, but it's so long and full of legalese, no one really reads it.
Right.
And so people are shocked to find that their information is actually being used and that they have agreed to provide that for particular pieces of advertisement. So it's kind of a broken social contract in that there are not equal parties in it. There's not an equal agreement here, not really, aside from clicking on I agree. So I almost feel like there would need to be that component as well, is that there would need to be this kind of agreement between the user and the provider.
Can you think of other things that the back end could provide, or other ways that might work from the back end?
Well, obviously, design components, like we were talking about, like simplicity of design, would be important. But I do think things like human-to-human interaction when it comes to customer service or something like that. Like there's just never a chat bot ever, which means you might have a fair amount of overhead. So this wouldn't necessarily be. The business model could not be maximize profit. So this might limit you on the back end from, say, making an initial public offering and being a publicly traded company. That gives you a priority to your stockholders, not to your users, which isn't always the same thing. So I think it would influence the business model. I think you would have to have some kind of corporate culture that promotes kind of the conversations we're having. Like, let's talk about what does it mean to live virtuously online, and how do we practice that?
Another example of something in the back end, if you read something on Facebook right now, what's the thing that you can do? Like the thing that it's waiting for you to do is to type something in response. What if instead of typing something in response, the default thing was click to schedule a meeting or schedule a phone call with this person? If there's somebody with whom you disagree, let's look at the calendars and, why don't you guys talk at 3:15 tomorrow? You both have your schedule free, or meet in person, or click to go out to dinner and look
And
at
that
these.
localizes the experience,
exactly.
which would be fantastic.
What if there was even a double click necessity? I mean, I think about times, just heartbreaking times when I've heard about things where fracture in relationship because someone writes something and someone says something.
Yeah.
I think, what if at least on the comment level, you had just a little box that pops up that says, "You sure?" It's just, I mean, this is real small kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And is it a hassle? Sure. Does it take another second? Absolutely.
Will it make people think twice?
I mean, I wonder how many people would have thought back, well, maybe I'm not sure. And then once in a while someone would say, heck yes, I'm sure. Let me do it again, But I wonder how many things that wouldn't save.
Yeah.
It's sort of the unsend.
I think I like the idea of talking about like what would comments and conversations even look like, but even defaulting the initial comment to it must be in the form of a question.
Nice.
Because when you ask the question, even if it's a snark-filled question, right? It for a lot
Invites
of
a
things,
response.
It invites response, but it also is a safe out where you don't have to respond. Right? You're not making a statement against someone's character per se. You're not necessarily saying definitively, I'm right, you're wrong, and they feel compelled to defend their position.
Right.
It's a question is less threatening, even if it is somewhat sarcastic. It is less threatening than a sentence with a period on the end. So, I mean, remember in the case of Facebook, back when they started, they actually had a phrase at the front end of their status updates. Do you remember that? They had your name, and it was I am, or like so-and-so is.
It used to drive me crazy because someone would say, I am, and then they would say, the grammar wouldn't work. It
Yeah,
was driving me crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They changed it, I think, because people just started ignoring the grammar of that.
Yeah,
But for me,
yeah.
when I was originally using it, I would actually want to make the grammar work.
Yeah.
And so it would actually force me to think about what I was about to say and what I was about to state. And so it just even having that default in there that kind of limited your options of expression.
So you can't just say,
Force that
look what this
thought.
politician did, it's terrible.
Yeah,
You have to
couldn't
say,
say-
I am feeling upset about this.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you couldn't just throw it out there.
Yeah.
You would have to think about it. And so I think even framing that, because if it's a built environment and if there is an agreement between provider and user, there's this understanding that limitations exist. I think that's something that has led to all sorts of strangeness and craziness in social media, is this almost illusion of no limitation.
Okay, so let's do social media where you can't say anything if it's not in the form of a complete sentence, and if it's a run-on sentence or a sentence fragment or a phrase, it automatically gets
Well,
done.
and sort
That's
of
Twitter,
related,
right? Like 140
Yeah.
characters.
Related to this is the idea that instead of putting your information on other rented platforms, idea is to get skilled at owning your own domain in your own space. We'd been talking some about social media and connecting with other people, and in those cases you probably do need some platform. But if what you're doing is just posting information or saving information, then maybe that's the solution, is to abandon social media for those purposes, and then you can create your own built environment to make it look exactly how you want. You can put whatever pictures you want to there, whatever text you want, and have it in any format you want to. So I would agree that
People may never come visit. That's the only
I know people. That's true.
I think there is a way in which you can both engage with social media and have that built environment. Whereas if you focus on the built environment first, and if that built environment is understood to have a purpose, so it's not about having a maximum number of people engaging or something like that. Most of the time we want to use social media to engage with friends and family anyway, so how does that make a built space any less different? Because who's going to know about it first? Friends and family. So I'm not sure that's a reason to not do it. But I think with the built space, there are plenty of tools that allow you to then push that built space content onto those social media platforms. And what I have found from working in my own built spaces with WordPress blogs and everything is that when I focus my attention there and I start there and creating content and then push it out to social media, what I'm doing is that does help me influence what happens in the space of social media. My built space becomes the filter or the buffer, if you will, for my thoughts before they get out there. So it becomes a really important way for me to think through what I'm saying rather than just going to Facebook first or Twitter first and ranting and blast. It allows me to kind of like practice that virtuous self-control, that idea of patience. Because let me tell you, the pressure to get a comment out there as fast as possible is immense. And when I have to slow myself down to work and type a blog post, say, slower than the news cycle, it can feel really difficult to feel like I'm actually going to say anything of relevance. But I find that when I actually take the time, put it out there for people, it does help. It does assist people who are looking for greater depth, who are looking to understand the meaning of an event, et cetera, et cetera. So there's still value in it. Plus, I've gone through that extra step of filtering what I'm going to say before it gets out there. So you can have both.
Yep.